I was sitting on my back porch in Austin, Texas, watching the rain barrel I just installed fill up with water from the afternoon thunderstorm, when I saw her marching across my lawn like she owned the place. The woman had that unmistakable look of someone who lived to make other people's lives miserable, clipboard in hand, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy weather, and a pursed lip expression that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she called out in a shrill voice that cut through the sound of rain pattering on my roof. "Are you Nathan Emerson?" I stood up from my lawn chair, wiping rain droplets off my forearms. "That's me. Can I help you?" She didn't wait for an invitation before stepping onto my covered porch, her white tennis shoes leaving muddy prints on the wood. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of our community standards." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. I'd moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago, kept my lawn mowed, my house painted in approved colors, and hadn't so much as left my trash cans out past collection day. "Violation? What are you talking about?" Patricia pointed a manicured finger at my rain barrel, a simple blue 55-gallon drum connected to my downspout. "That eyesore is not permitted on any property within Meadowbrook Estates. It's unsightly, potentially dangerous, and violates Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines regarding exterior modifications." "It's a rain barrel," I said slowly, like I was explaining something to a child, "for collecting rainwater. It's environmentally friendly and saves me money on my water bill." "I don't care if it prints money," Patricia snapped, making a note on her clipboard. "It's not approved. You have 7 days to remove it or face a fine of $100 per day until compliance is achieved." My jaw dropped. $100 a day? Are you serious? "Deadly serious, Mr. Emerson. The HOA board takes community standards very seriously. We have an image to maintain." She thrust a yellow piece of paper at me, which I took automatically. "This is your official notice. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving me standing there in disbelief, staring at the violation notice in my hand. The paper listed my address, the date, and a description of my alleged offense in bureaucratic language that made collecting rainwater sound like I was running an illegal methamphetamine operation. I went inside, water dripping from my hair, and immediately pulled out my laptop. If there was one thing I'd learned in my 32 years on this planet, it was to do my research before backing down from anything. I spent the next 2 hours diving deep into Texas state law, HOA regulations, and property rights. What I found made my blood boil. Texas law, specifically the Texas Property Code Section 202.007, explicitly stated that HOAs could not prohibit rainwater harvesting systems. The law had been on the books since 2011, updated in 2013 to strengthen protections for homeowners. Not only was my rain barrel legal, but Patricia and her HOA board were violating state law by trying to fine me for it. I printed out copies of the relevant statutes, highlighted the key sections, and felt a grim satisfaction settling over me. Patricia Hendricks had picked the wrong person to bully. The next morning, I called the phone number listed at the bottom of the violation notice. A woman answered on the third ring. "Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda, this is Nathan Emerson. I received a violation notice yesterday about my rain barrel, and I need to speak with Patricia Hendricks or someone on the board." "Oh yes, Mr. Emerson. Mrs. Hendricks mentioned you might call. Would you like to schedule a time to appear before the board?" "Actually, I'd like to resolve this now. The violation notice is invalid. Texas state law explicitly protects my right to collect rainwater. There was a pause. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. The board doesn't make exceptions to community standards. It's not about exceptions. It's about the law. Can you please have Mrs. Hendricks call me back? Or better yet, give me her email address so I can send her the relevant statutes. Brenda gave me an email address, though her tone suggested she thought I was wasting everyone's time. I thanked her and immediately drafted an email to Patricia, attaching PDFs of the Texas property code sections and a polite but firm explanation that my rain barrel was completely legal and that the HOA had no authority to prohibit it or fine me for it. I hit send and waited. 3 days passed with no response. On the 4th day, I found another notice taped to my front door. This one informed me that I now had 3 days remaining to remove the rain barrel, and failure to comply would result in fines starting immediately after the deadline. There was no mention of my email, no acknowledgement of the law I'd cited, nothing. I called the HOA office again. This time, Brenda sounded less friendly. Mr. Emerson, the board has reviewed your email and determined that community guidelines take precedence in this matter. You need to remove the rain barrel. That's not how the law works, I said, trying to keep my voice level. State law supersedes HOA regulations. They can't enforce a rule that violates state statutes. You'll need to take that up with the board at the next meeting. It's scheduled for next Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community center. Fine. I'll be there. I spent the next week preparing. I printed out more copies of the relevant laws, researched similar cases in other Texas communities, and even found a few legal precedents where homeowners had successfully fought HOA overreach in court. I also took detailed photographs of my rain barrel, showing how neatly installed it was, tucked against the back corner of my house where it was barely visible from the street. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center carrying a folder full of documentation. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat, Patricia in the center like a queen holding court. About 20 other residents occupied the folding chairs facing the board, most of them looking bored or resigned. Patricia spotted me immediately. "Mr. Emerson, how good of you to join us. You're on the agenda under new business." I nodded and took a seat in the back row, listening as the board droned through various reports about landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, and a complaint about someone's dog barking. Finally, after nearly an hour, Patricia cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "We now come to the matter of Mr. Nathan Emerson and his unauthorized rain barrel installation. Mr. Emerson, would you like to address the board?" I stood up and walked to the front of the room, very aware of 20 pairs of eyes watching me. "Thank you." As I explained in my email, which apparently wasn't read or was ignored, my rain barrel is completely legal under Texas state law. Specifically, Texas Property Code Section 202.007 states that a property owners association may not include or enforce a provision in a dedicatory instrument that prohibits or restricts a property owner's right to harvest rainwater through the use of certain systems. Patricia's face had taken on a pinched quality. "Mr. Emerson, we have community standards that all residents agreed to when they purchased their homes. Community standards can't violate state law," I replied, keeping my tone respectful but firm. I pulled out copies of the statute and passed them to each board member. This law has been in effect since 2011. The HOA has no legal authority to prohibit my rain barrel or to fine me for having it. A man to Patricia's left, whose nameplate identified him as Douglas Martinez, looked at the papers I'd handed him and frowned. Patricia, is this accurate? I wasn't aware of this law. It doesn't matter, Patricia said quickly. Our covenants, conditions, and restrictions were established in 2008 before this supposed law. They're grandfathered in. I shook my head. That's not how it works. State law supersedes HOA rules, period. Even if your CCRs predated the law, which they do, the law still applies. You can't enforce a provision that violates state statutes. Another board member, a woman named Sandra Chen, according to her nameplate, spoke up. Mr. Emerson, even if what you're saying is technically correct, the rain barrel is unsightly. Can't you at least screen it or paint it to match your house? It's already positioned in the least visible location on my property, I said, and the law specifically protects my right to have it. I'm happy to make reasonable aesthetic accommodations, but I'm not removing it, and I'm not paying any fines. Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Mr. Emerson, if you refuse to comply with the board's directive, we will have no choice but to proceed with fines and, if necessary, place a lien on your property. A murmur went through the assembled residents. I noticed several people pulling out their phones, probably looking up the law I'd cited. If you do that, you'll be violating state law, and I'll have grounds to sue the HOA for harassment and for legal fees, I said calmly. I don't want to go that route. I just want to collect rainwater legally, which is my right as a Texas homeowner. Douglas leaned over and whispered something to Patricia, who shook her head sharply. He tried again, and she cut him off with a curt hand gesture. This matter requires further review by the board, Patricia announced. We'll table this discussion and revisit it at next month's meeting. In the meantime, Mr. Emerson, you are not to install any additional rainwater collection equipment. I'm not installing anything else, I said. But I'm also not removing what I have, and I won't be paying any fines. I walked back to my seat, feeling the tension in the room. After the meeting adjourned, several residents approached me, asking questions about the law and whether it applied to them too. One man, who introduced himself as Richard, told me he'd wanted to install a rain barrel for years but had been afraid of HOA retaliation. You should do it, I encouraged him. It's your legal right. Don't let them intimidate you. Over the next week, I noticed something interesting. 3 other houses in the neighborhood suddenly sported rain barrels. One was a fancy wooden model that looked like an old-fashioned whiskey barrel. Another was painted to look like an R2-D2 droid from Star Wars. The third was a more utilitarian setup like mine, but with decorative landscaping around it. Patricia must have noticed too, because I received a certified letter 10 days after the board meeting. This one wasn't just a violation notice. It was a formal letter from an attorney named Gregory Walton, informing me that the HOA was proceeding with fines of $100 per day, retroactive to the original deadline date. According to their math, I now owed $1,500, and the meter was still running. The letter also threatened legal action if I didn't comply immediately. The other 3 homeowners with new rain barrels received similar letters. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter and feeling anger build in my chest. This wasn't just about a rain barrel anymore. Patricia and her board were willfully ignoring state law and harassing residents who were exercising their legal rights. Something had to be done. I called Richard, the neighbor who'd approached me after the board meeting. Did you get a letter from an attorney? Yeah, about an hour ago. My wife is freaking out. She wants me to just get rid of the barrel to avoid trouble. Don't, I said. They're bluffing. Or if they're not, they're going to lose badly in court. Listen, I'm going to fight this, but it would help to have others involved. Are you willing to stand with me? There was a long pause. What would that involve? probably hiring our own attorney, possibly filing a countersuit. I'm serious about this, Richard. They can't be allowed to violate state law and bully homeowners. Let me talk to my wife. Can I call you back tonight? Absolutely. I made similar calls to the other two homeowners with rain barrels. One, a woman named Lauren Hughes, was immediately on board. I'm a paralegal, she told me. I've already looked into this, and you're absolutely right about the law. Patricia is way out of line. I'm in. The fourth homeowner, an elderly man named Tom, was more hesitant but ultimately agreed to join us if we found a good attorney. Lauren took charge of finding legal representation, using her professional connections to locate someone who specialized in HOA disputes. 2 days later, we had a conference call with an attorney named Marcus Reynolds, who practiced out of downtown Austin. "This is pretty straightforward," Marcus said after hearing our story. "The HOA is clearly violating Texas Property Code Section 202.007. The law is explicit and has been tested in court multiple times. HOAs always lose these cases. So what do we do?" I asked. "First, I'll send a cease and desist letter to the HOA and their attorney, explaining the law and demanding they withdraw all fines and threats. That sometimes resolves things quickly once they realize you have legal representation. If they don't back down, we file a lawsuit seeking declaratory judgment that your rain barrels are legal, plus damages for harassment and legal fees." "How much will this cost?" Richard asked nervously. "My retainer is $3,000 for something like this, but here's the good news. When HOAs lose these cases, and they will lose, the court typically orders them to pay the homeowners legal fees, so you'll likely get that money back plus damages." We agreed to move forward, splitting the retainer 4 ways. Marcus got to work immediately, and within 2 days, a strongly worded cease and desist letter went out to both Patricia and Gregory Walton, the HOA's attorney. The response came faster than I expected. Gregory Walton called Marcus directly, and they had what Marcus later described as a frank discussion about the law and the HOA's precarious legal position. Walton apparently expressed surprise that the board hadn't consulted him about the Rainwater statute before proceeding with fines. "He's trying to distance himself from this mess," Marcus told me over the phone. "He knows his clients are wrong and he doesn't want to be stuck defending an unwinnable case. So will they back down? We'll see." I gave them a week to withdraw all penalties and confirm in writing that rain barrels are permitted. If they don't, we file suit. The week passed with no response from the HOA. Marcus filed our lawsuit in Travis County District Court, seeking a declaratory judgment, return of any fines paid plus interest, damages for harassment and emotional distress, and attorney's fees. The 4 of us were listed as plaintiffs, with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and Patricia Hendricks individually named as defendants. The lawsuit made local news. A reporter from the Austin American-Statesman called me for an interview, and I explained the situation. The resulting article, titled "Austin HOA Accused of Violating State Rainwater Law," ran both online and in print. It quoted Marcus extensively about property rights and HOA overreach, and included Patricia's terse, "no comment" when the reporter contacted her. The publicity changed everything. My phone started ringing with calls from other residents in Meadowbrook Estates, many of whom had their own complaints about Patricia's leadership. I heard stories about fines for grass that was supposedly a 1/4 inch too long, threats over garden gnomes and wind chimes, and aggressive enforcement of rules that seemed designed more to generate revenue than maintain property values. One woman, who asked to remain anonymous, told me Patricia had fined her $500 for painting her mailbox post the wrong shade of white. She brought out a color swatch and everything, the woman said, her voice shaking with anger. It was off by maybe one shade. I had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it. Another resident reported that Patricia had tried to ban vegetable gardens in front yards, claiming they were unsightly, until several homeowners threatened legal action. The more I heard, the more convinced I became that this lawsuit was about more than rain barrels. It was about standing up to a bully who had turned a homeowners association into her personal fiefdom. The HOA's response to our lawsuit arrived 6 weeks after filing. Gregory Walton was no longer representing them. Instead, they'd hired a larger firm out of Houston, and their motion to dismiss made several creative but ultimately baseless arguments. They claimed their CCRs were a private contract that superseded state law, that rain barrels posed a public health hazard by breeding mosquitoes, and that we had agreed to abide by all HOA rules when we purchased our properties. Marcus filed a detailed opposition to their motion, methodically dismantling each argument with case law and statutory citations. The judge scheduled a hearing for 3 months out. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Estates became increasingly tense. Patricia began what I can only describe as a harassment campaign. She or other board members would drive through the neighborhood daily, looking for violations to cite. I received notices about my trash cans being visible from the street 15 minutes after collection time, about a tiny patch of crabgrass in my lawn, about my porch light being too bright. Other plaintiffs in the lawsuit received similar treatment. Lauren got cited for having her car parked in her driveway during the day, supposedly violating a rule about vehicles being garaged when not in use. Richard received a notice that his house number was mounted half an inch lower than required by community standards. The pettiness would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Marcus advised us to document everything, take photos, save all correspondence. This actually helps our case, he explained. It demonstrates a pattern of retaliation and harassment. Judges don't like that. 2 weeks before the hearing, I was working in my garage when a Toyota Camry pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 50s stepped out, and I recognized her from the first board meeting. It was Sandra Chen, one of the board members who had seemed more reasonable than Patricia. "Mr. Emerson, do you have a few minutes to talk?" I set down the tool I was holding and nodded. "Sure. What can I do for you?" She glanced around nervously, as if checking whether anyone was watching. I wanted to apologize for how the board has handled this situation. When Patricia first brought up the rain barrel issue, I didn't think it was a big deal. I assumed you were just violating some minor aesthetic rule. I had no idea about the state law. None of the other board members knew about it either. Douglas might have, but Patricia dominates the meetings. When you presented that information, I wanted to look into it further, but Patricia insisted we needed to maintain authority. She said if we backed down, every homeowner would think they could do whatever they wanted. I leaned against my workbench. "Mrs. Chen, I appreciate you coming here, but what exactly are you telling me?" She took a deep breath. 3 board members, including me, are planning to call for a special meeting to remove Patricia as president and withdraw the lawsuit. We need a majority vote, which we'll have. But I wanted you to know that this is happening because you were right to stand up to her. She's been running this HOA like a dictatorship for 3 years, and we've all been too intimidated or apathetic to stop her. When is this special meeting? Next Tuesday at 7 p.m. We'll be sending out notice to all residents this weekend. You and your co-plaintiffs should come. This affects you directly. After Sandra left, I immediately called Marcus and the other plaintiffs. Lauren was thrilled. This could end everything without having to go through a full trial, she said. Tuesday evening, the community center was packed. At least 60 residents showed up, more than triple the usual attendance. The air was electric with anticipation. Patricia sat at the board table looking pale and rigid, a stack of papers in front of her and her phone face down beside them. Douglas Martinez, acting as vice president, called the meeting to order. We have a special order of business tonight. A petition has been submitted by 3 board members requesting the removal of Patricia Hendricks as HOA president and board member, citing misconduct and mismanagement. Patricia's head snapped up. This is absurd. You can't just remove me without cause. We have cause, Sandra said, standing up. Her voice was shaking but determined. You pursued a lawsuit against homeowners who were exercising legal rights protected by state law. You've been warned repeatedly by our attorney that this case is unwinnable. Yet you insisted on proceeding, wasting tens of thousands of dollars in HOA funds. You've engaged in what appears to be retaliatory enforcement of minor violations against the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. And you've created a toxic environment that's driven property values down because people don't want to move here anymore. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. I have maintained standards in this community. I've kept property values up by enforcing our rules. These people, she gestured toward me and the other plaintiffs, want to turn Meadowbrook Estates into a trailer park where anything goes. Oh, please, someone called from the audience. It's a rain barrel, not a meth lab. Laughter broke out, which only made Patricia angrier. This is inappropriate. I call for this meeting to be adjourned. You don't have that authority, Douglas said firmly. You're the subject of a removal action. The vote is happening. All residents in good standing can vote, and we need a simple majority. What followed was a somewhat chaotic but ultimately clear process. Residents lined up to vote by written ballot, which were collected and counted by Sandra and another board member. Patricia sat frozen at the table, staring straight ahead, while whispered conversations happened all around her. When the count was finished, Douglas announced the results. By a vote of 58-7, with 3 abstentions, Patricia Hendricks is removed as president and board member of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Patricia grabbed her papers, shoved them into her bag, and stormed out without a word, slamming the door behind her hard enough that the crash echoed through the building. With Patricia gone, the meeting continued. Douglas was elected interim president, and the board immediately voted to withdraw the lawsuit against me and my neighbors. They also voted to officially recognize that rain barrels and other rainwater collection systems were permitted under state law, and that the relevant section of the CCRs would be amended to reflect this. Furthermore, they voted to refund any fines that had been paid, plus interest, and to issue formal apologies to all 4 plaintiffs. Marcus called me the next morning, chuckling. Well, that's one way to resolve a lawsuit. The HOA's attorneys have already filed a notice of dismissal. We'll need to file our own paperwork, accepting the dismissal and confirming the settlement terms, but you've essentially won. What about our legal fees? I asked. I'll submit a demand for those. Given that they're backing down completely, and we have documented evidence of their violations, they'll almost certainly pay. I'd estimate you'll each recover your portion of the retainer plus a few thousand more. Over the next few weeks, life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal, or at least a new normal. Douglas proved to be a far more reasonable president than Patricia. He sent out an email to all residents explaining the legal situation with rainwater collection, and encouraging people to consider environmental initiatives that complied with state law. 5 more houses installed rain barrels. One enterprising family set up an elaborate rainwater collection system with multiple barrels and a drip irrigation setup for their vegetable garden. I thought that was the end of the story. I was wrong. 3 months after Patricia's removal, I was at work when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Emerson, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Austin Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about the Meadowbrook Estates HOA." My stomach dropped. "What's this about? I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you come down to the station today?" I left work early and drove to the police station, my mind racing through possibilities. When I met Detective Morrison, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, she led me to an interview room. "Mr. Emerson, you're not in any trouble," she said immediately. "But we're investigating possible financial crimes related to your HOA, and your name came up in the course of that investigation because of your lawsuit. I need to ask you what you know about the HOA's finances." "Honestly, not much. I paid my dues, got fined illegally, and fought back." "Why?" Detective Morrison pulled out a folder. After Patricia Hendricks was removed as president, the new board conducted an audit of HOA finances. They discovered significant discrepancies. Over the past 3 years, approximately $87,000 in HOA funds are unaccounted for. The board reported it to us, and we've been investigating. I felt my eyes widen. "You think Patricia stole from the HOA? We're looking into several possibilities. Patricia had sole control over the HOA checking account and credit card. Checks were supposed to require 2 signatures, but she got that rule changed 2 years ago. We found evidence of cash withdrawals, charges to the credit card for personal expenses, and payments to contractors for work that was never done or was significantly overcharged." "Holy shit," I breathed. "The reason I'm talking to you is that some of these questionable expenses coincided with enforcement actions. For instance, the Houston law firm that took over your lawsuit after the first attorney withdrew charged $45,000 in fees for 2 months of work on a simple case. That's way above market rate. We think Patricia may have had some kind of arrangement with them. Like they kicked money back to her, possibly. We're still investigating." I wanted to ask if Patricia ever approached you about settling the lawsuit privately, or if she said anything that might indicate financial motivation. I thought back through all my interactions with Patricia. No, nothing like that. She seemed motivated by control and ego more than money. But she was aggressive about fines, always trying to maximize them. Detective Morrison made notes. "That tracks with what we're seeing. We've interviewed about 20 residents who were fined over the past 3 years. The amounts were often arbitrary and excessive. One theory is that she was generating revenue through fines and then siphoning it off." Over the next month, the investigation into Patricia expanded. The detective brought in a forensic accountant who uncovered an even more elaborate scheme. Patricia had created fake vendor accounts for maintenance and landscaping services, submitting invoices for work that was never performed and depositing the checks into accounts she controlled. She'd also been taking cash advances on the HOA credit card and reporting them as legitimate expenses. The total amount stolen was eventually calculated at nearly $125,000 over 4 years. Patricia was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I heard about it from Lauren, who heard it from Sandra, who was contacted by the police as part of their investigation. The charges included theft over $100,000, money laundering, and fraudulent use of identifying information, all felonies under Texas law. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, our quiet little HOA dispute became a bigger scandal. Reporters dug into Patricia's background and discovered she'd been forced to resign from a previous HOA in Houston under murky circumstances. There had apparently been financial irregularities there too, but the board had chosen not to pursue charges if she left quietly. She moved here and did the same thing all over again, Douglas told me when we ran into each other at the grocery store. We're cooperating fully with the police. The HOA is also filing a civil suit to recover the stolen funds, but honestly, I don't know if she has any assets left. She might have spent it all. The criminal case moved through the system over the next year. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but as evidence mounted, her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She eventually pled guilty to theft over $100,000 and was sentenced to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4, plus restitution of $125,000 to the HOA. The restitution was largely symbolic. Patricia's house went into foreclosure, her bank accounts were nearly empty, and there was no hidden cache of money to recover. The HOA eventually received about $35,000 from the sale of her property and liquidation of her assets, but the rest was gone. As for me and my rain barrel, it's still sitting in the same spot on my property, collecting water every time it rains. I've expanded the system now, adding a second barrel and using the water for my garden and lawn. My water bills have dropped by about 40%, which makes me happy every time I look at the savings. The new HOA board under Douglas has been night and day different from Patricia's reign. They focus on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They've organized neighborhood events, negotiated better rates for shared services, and created a reserve fund to handle major repairs. Most importantly, they've adopted a policy of transparency, publishing financial reports quarterly and holding open forums where residents can ask questions. Other residents have followed my lead with rainwater collection. We now have about 20 houses with various systems, from simple barrels to elaborate collection and filtration setups. One neighbor, an engineer, installed a 500-gallon tank that supplies all his outdoor water needs year-round. Richard, who was one of my co-plaintiffs, became such an advocate for rainwater harvesting that he started a local Facebook group to help people design and install systems. Lauren, the paralegal, joined the HOA board and has been working to rewrite the CCRs to remove outdated and potentially illegal provisions. The legal fees were eventually sorted out. The HOA paid $18,000 to cover our attorney's costs, which when divided among the 4 plaintiffs, meant we each received our retainer back plus about $1,500 extra. Marcus joked that we should use it to buy top-of-the-line rain barrels. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm struck by how a simple environmental choice turned into a battle over property rights, exposed corruption, and ultimately led to positive change in our community. If Patricia had just left my rain barrel alone, she might have continued stealing from the HOA for years. Instead, her need to control and dominate led to scrutiny that brought down her entire scheme. I've told this story to friends and family countless times, and people always ask if I regret buying a house in an HOA community. The honest answer is that I don't, not anymore. HOAs aren't inherently bad. They're tools for managing shared resources and maintaining community standards. The problem is when they're controlled by people who abuse that power, either through petty tyranny like Patricia's enforcement style, or through outright crime like her embezzlement. The experience taught me that standing up for your rights matters, even when it seems easier to just comply. If I'd removed that rain barrel to avoid conflict, I'd have spent years resenting the decision, and the HOA would have continued unchecked. Instead, by standing firm on solid legal ground, I helped spark changes that benefited the entire community. It also taught me the importance of paying attention to community governance. For years, most residents of Meadowbrook Estates, myself included, ignored HOA meetings and elections. We paid our dues and otherwise didn't think about it. That apathy allowed someone like Patricia to take control and operate without oversight. Now our meetings are better attended, elections are contested, and board members know they are accountable to residents. The rain barrel itself has become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents often hear the story when they move in, usually from multiple sources with increasingly embellished details. I've heard versions where I supposedly stood on the roof shouting about freedom, where Patricia tried to physically remove the barrel herself, and where the trial involved dramatic courtroom confrontations that never actually happened. The truth is messier and more mundane than those stories suggest, but also more meaningful. It's a story about the rule of law, about community, about the importance of doing your research and standing up for yourself when you're right. My vegetable garden, irrigated with collected rainwater, produced an amazing harvest last summer. I grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs, all thriving on rain that fell on my roof and flowed into my barrels instead of running off into storm drains. Every time I ate a tomato from that garden, I thought about the battle it took to make it possible. The garden became another point of neighborhood interest. Several residents asked me for advice on starting their own gardens, and I was happy to help. We've created an informal seed exchange program where people share seeds and starts from successful plants. Some people use collected rainwater for their gardens, others don't, but the community aspect of it has been wonderful. Douglas served as HOA president for 2 years before stepping down, saying he'd accomplished what he wanted to do, and it was time for new leadership. The election to replace him was actually competitive, with 3 candidates running. The winner was a woman named Jennifer, who ran on a platform of continuing the reforms Douglas had started, while also investing in community amenities. Under Jennifer's leadership, the HOA used some of its reserves to install a little free library at the entrance to the neighborhood, and to create a community garden space on a small piece of common land that had been sitting unused. The garden has plots that residents can rent for $25 a year, with the money going back into maintaining the space. Several of the plots use collected rainwater for irrigation. I sometimes wonder what Patricia thinks about all of this from prison. Does she have any regrets? Does she understand how her actions harmed people? Or does she still see herself as a victim of ungrateful homeowners who didn't appreciate her efforts? I'll probably never know. She's never reached out to apologize or explain herself, and I have no desire to contact her. Whatever her motivations were, whether it was greed, a need for control, or some combination of both, the outcome was clear. She hurt people, broke the law, and paid the price. The civil lawsuit the HOA filed against Patricia is still technically open, though everyone knows there's no more money to recover. Her sentence includes restitution requirements, so if she ever comes into money after her release, the HOA could potentially garnish it. But nobody's holding their breath for that. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates continues. My rain barrels collect water through every season. In spring, they overflow during heavy thunderstorms. In summer, they provide precious irrigation during the hot, dry months. In fall and winter, they collect enough to keep my landscaping healthy without running up huge water bills. I've calculated that over the 3 years since I installed the system, I've collected approximately 15,000 gallons of rainwater and saved about $600 on my water bills. But the real value isn't just financial. It's about being more connected to natural cycles, about using resources wisely, about taking a small but meaningful step toward sustainability. And it's about knowing that when someone with authority tried to bully me into giving up a legal right, I stood my ground and won. That lesson has value far beyond water conservation. It's changed how I approach conflicts and challenges in other areas of my life. I'm more willing to question authority when something seems wrong, more likely to research my rights, and more confident in standing up for what I believe is correct. Several people from the neighborhood have told me similar stories. They've pushed back on questionable decisions at work, challenged unfair policies in other contexts, or simply felt more empowered to speak up when something isn't right. The ripple effects of standing up to Patricia have spread far beyond HOA governance. The story has also had some unexpected professional benefits. I work in environmental consulting, and being able to tell clients about my personal experience fighting for rainwater collection rights has proven surprisingly valuable. It demonstrates commitment to environmental principles and willingness to advocate for sustainable practices, even when facing opposition. I've gotten at least 2 new clients specifically because they heard about the HOA situation and wanted to work with someone who walks the talk. Last month, I was invited to speak at a local environmental conference about residential rainwater harvesting. I talked about the technical aspects of system design and installation, but I also told the story of my battle with the HOA. The response was overwhelming. People came up afterward to share their own stories of HOA conflicts, to ask advice about similar situations, and to thank me for standing up for property rights and environmental stewardship. One woman told me she'd been thinking about installing rain barrels, but was afraid of her HOA's reaction. After hearing my story, she decided to go ahead with it. If they give me trouble, I'll cite Texas Property Code Section 202.007, she said with a smile. And if that doesn't work, I'll call your attorney. That moment crystallized something important for me. This was never just about my rain barrel or even about Patricia's corruption. It was about creating precedent and awareness, about making it easier for the next person who wants to exercise their legal rights. By fighting that battle publicly and winning, I'd helped clear the path for others. The rain barrel sitting beside my house is more than just a blue plastic drum collecting water. It's a symbol of the principle that individuals can challenge institutional overreach and win. It's a reminder that doing your research and knowing your rights matters. It's proof that communities can self-correct when people pay attention and get involved. On quiet evenings, when I'm watering my garden with collected rainwater, I sometimes think about the chain of events that started with Patricia marching across my lawn with her clipboard. If someone had told me then that a simple rain barrel would lead to HOA reform, criminal prosecution, and a stronger community, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's exactly what happened. The garden thrives, the community is healthier, and every time it rains, my barrels fill up with water that would otherwise wash away unused. In the end, that's what victory looks like. Not dramatic courtroom scenes or moments of triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing and seeing positive change result from it. My rain barrel continues to collect water, my garden continues to grow, and life in Meadowbrook Estates continues to improve. Patricia made her choices and faces the consequences. I made mine and get to enjoy fresh tomatoes irrigated with collected rainwater. I know which outcome I prefer. The whole experience has given me a deeper appreciation for the importance of local governance and community involvement. It's easy to ignore HOA meetings and let other people make decisions, but that's how problems like Patricia happen. Vigilance and participation aren't just civic duties, they're practical necessities for maintaining functional communities. I still live in the same house, and I plan to stay here for many years. The neighborhood is a good place now, getting better all the time. My rain barrel was just the beginning of positive changes that continue to unfold. And whenever I see it sitting there, reliably collecting water rain by rain, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right, even over something as simple as water collection, can make a real difference.